One of the coolest use cases of Python is making simple GUI applications. But there's a big difference between creating an app for your personal use and between distributing it all across the web, reaching many people who don't necessarily know anything about Python. So in this tutorial, I will show you just how easy it is to convert your Python apps into full-blown professional software. And the result is a single setup file which anyone can download and install on their system. So are you ready? Let's roll. The app we'll convert today is my random recipe picker, which we have created together in a previous tutorial using SQLite and Tkinter. But don't you worry, this will work just fine for Kivy, KivyMD, PyQt5 and other GUIs. Now in this example, we are dealing with a Python file, a database, as well as a bunch of assets, specifically images and TrueType fonts. So if your project contains similar files, this tutorial will save you lots of headache. Now, the last detail I should probably mention is that I've slightly modified the database of the original recipe picker according to your suggestions. So instead of having many tables, we now only have two of them. One that stores the recipes and the other the ingredients. So first things first, we will navigate to my random recipe picker repository. And we can either clone it like true professionals, or we can just click on code and then download zip, which is the lazy approach. Then we will extract it somewhere in our file system. We will, of course, navigate inside, where we will only keep the folder named Relational Database Complete Project Windows. We can dispose of everything else. Now inside this folder, you will find all our project files, but in order to use them, we will need to install some requirements first. Now, by requirements, I mean dependencies or the Python libraries our Tkinter app utilizes. Now luckily, I've prepared this really nice file for you so we can install all those requirements at once. For this, we will need a console or a terminal, and in my case, I am using Anaconda. Now, if you're not sure how, please check out this tutorial of mine. Now, let me quickly enlarge this text so we don't need a microscope to see it. Now, the first thing we'll do is create a brand new working environment with conda create --name, and we will call it converter, or any other name you'd like. We will also install Python 3.9 inside it, and let's hit enter. Now, if you're looking for the equivalent venv command, you can of course find it in the description. We will then proceed with Y, and we can now activate our new working environment with conda activate converter. Now, once we are inside this environment, we will copy the path of our project folder. We will then navigate there with our terminal by using the cd command as in change directory, and then we will paste the path we just copied. Now, once we are in the exact same directory as our requirements file, we will then type pip install -r requirements.txt. And beautiful, we've installed all those libraries at once. Next, we will need to find a way of bundling our script, data, and assets into an executable file. Now, in the previous tutorial from many years ago, we've used a library called auto-py-to-exe, and it had a beautiful graphic interface. Today, we will use a library named Pyinstaller instead, which is the command line equivalent, or how I like to call it, AutoPy's mom. So let's quickly install it once again with pip. We will do this with pip install Pyinstaller. Since we've used pip earlier, we might as well be consistent. Now we will make sure that our terminal is in the exact same folder as our script file, which in our case is recipepicker.py, and it's basically where our Tkinter app lives. Now, if we are indeed in the exact same directory, we will then type pyinstaller recipepicker.py, and we will let Pyinstaller run its magic. It might take you a minute or two. Now, once we see this last completed successfully message, we will go back to our project folder, to discover a whole bunch of new files. So first we have 2 new folders, one of them named build, and the other is named dist or distribution. And this is ultimately where our executable file will be located once we will create it, okay? Now, in addition, we have this recipe-picker.spec file, which we will briefly discuss in just a few moments. Now, an important thing to mention is just because we are able to run our app perfectly through the terminal, it doesn't mean that it's adapted to Pyinstaller. So, for example, we can now run our program with Python recipe-picker.py. We will verify that it's fully operational. Yep, it works great. But the only problem is we'll still need a terminal in order to execute it. It is not designed to run on its own just yet. So let's take care of that. For this, we will need a helper function, which I did not write, so I'll refer you to this thread on Stack Overflow, and you can of course find it in the description. We will then scroll down, and we will copy this entire resource path function, which Nautilius was kind enough to provide. So let's quickly copy it, and let's paste it inside our script right below the imports. Now, if you'd like to be extra nice, you can always copy the URL of this thread, and you can include it inside your code as a comment. Now, for many systems, this function works perfectly well. You can find evidence of it all over the web. However, both in the case of my rogue build as well as my Alienware, I had to adjust this _maypass to _maypass2. Now this is very important. I got stuck here for a very long time, so if one of them doesn't work, please try the other. Now, without getting into too many details, the reason why we need this function is because Pyinstaller expects to find your assets, as in images, data, and fonts, inside a temporary folder named sys._maypass, or in my case, maypass2, which is very different from our project folder, as it is not temporary at all, okay? So basically, resource path helps Pyinstaller with finding the correct location of your assets. Now, the way to use it, we will simply copy this function call, and everywhere we load an external file, we will wrap its path within resource path. There you go. And we will repeat it for all our assets. Okay, so we took care of the fonts. We will do the same for our data. And lastly, both our logos. Beautiful. Now, before I forget, let's scroll up. And since resource path is using members of the sys and os modules, we will of course need to import them. So import sys and import os. Now, we don't need to install those modules because they come built in with Python. So let's quickly save this file, and let's have a chat about this recipe-picker.spec file, which I've mentioned earlier. Now, you will find many threads on Stack Overflow instructing you to specify all your assets inside this file. For example, if we go back to our thread and we look for the correct answer, you can see that they append the path to their assets inside this data's property, right? So there's this very long path and they want you to do it for all your assets. However, I discovered that it makes no difference at all. You can leave your spec file as is and everything will work just fine. So I feel very bad for all the folks who typed those very long paths in here, especially if you have many assets. So please feel free to ignore the spec file unless you have specific errors that guide you there. For example, an error associated with the hidden imports, okay? You may encounter it, and only then this becomes relevant. Now, the last asset we are yet to take care of is the icon of our program. Now, I find that the easiest solution is to navigate to a site such as image.onlineconvert and then to drag and drop one of our logos into it, okay? So let's go for this bottom logo because it already kind of looks like an icon, right? So let's drop it in this green box and let's hit start. We will then download it. We will cut it from the downloads folder and we will paste it inside the root of our project. And instead of having this very long name, we will rename it, we will rename it to icon. Boom, done. And we are finally ready to convert our scripts, data, and assets into an executable file. So back in Anaconda, we will type Pyinstaller --name, and in my case, I'll call it recipe, picker, in camel case. Now, since we'd like to generate a single executable file rather than a giant messy directory, we will add the --one file flag. Now, in addition, since we'd only like to display the graphic user interface window rather than a console beside it, we will add the --windowed flag. Next, we will set the --icon to icon.ico, which we've just generated and saved in the root directory. And then lastly, we'll specify the name of the script, which in our case is recipe_picker.py. And whew, are you ready? Let's convert it. Now this may take you a minute or two. And beautiful, once everything was completed successfully, we will navigate back to our project folder and then to the distribution folder, where we can find our brand new executable file. So let's quickly check that everything works as expected. And oh no! It looks like Pyinstaller is having some issues with finding our assets. So let's see exactly what's going on. And yeah, it kind of makes sense. Our path is completely messed up. We start with a bunch of double backslashes and we end with a single slash. Well, this can't be right. So let's quickly fix it back in our recipe_picker.py. Now, everywhere we see a slash inside our paths, we will replace it with a double backslash. We will, of course, do this for all our assets. And boom. Now let's quickly save it. Now, in addition, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's another problem here. So it seems that Pyinstaller is not looking for our assets inside the root directory, our project folder. It is actually looking for those assets inside the distribution directory. Well, that's an easy fix. So let's just close this error. Let's navigate to the project folder. Let's cut the assets, data, and fonts folders. We will, of course, paste them inside the distribution folder. Easy peasy. Now, since we made a bunch of changes, we will need to convert our app once again. So back in Anaconda, we will hit the up arrow, which will fetch the recent command, and then we will press enter once again. Now, once Pyinstaller is done, we will make another attempt at running our program, and fingers crossed. And oh my god! Look at this beautiful app. So let's quickly make sure that it's fully operational. And yep, it sure is. Congratulations, folks! We were successfully able to convert our Python files into a full-blown executable program. But there's just one problem. If we want to distribute this program, we will need to include the executable as well as those 3 asset directories, which is not exactly what we were aiming for. Traditionally, when we download a software, we download a single setup file instead. So let's quickly take care of that. For this, we will use a software named Inno Setup, which is free of charge both for personal and both for commercial use. So if you'd like to read more about it, please check out this section at the very, very bottom. Now let's quickly go ahead and download Inno Setup, and we will go for the stable release. We will then select one of those download links. I'm going to go for the US one, even though I don't really think it matters. Now let's quickly install it. And we will, of course, follow the installation instructions of the setup wizard, which is ultimately what we're trying to implement for our recipe picker. Now, once the installation is complete, we will then launch Inno Setup, and we will create a new script file using the script wizard. We will, of course, hit next, and we will fill in some basic information about our program. Now, in my case, the name is random recipe picker. The version can remain at 1.5 because the previous version did not have a relational database and this one does, so kind of makes sense to me. Now the publisher is probably Python Simplified, and the website is pythonsimplified.org, even though I've paid for another year of the CA domain. So Python simplified CA also works. Now here we specify the default destination folder of our program. And since program files is very traditional, we will leave it as is. Now in addition, we would like to allow users to change it if they'd like. So let's go next. Now here we specify the path to our executable file, which we have just created with Pyinstaller. So let's go ahead and browse. We will copy the path of our distribution directory, and we will fetch our recipe picker.exe. Now, in addition, we will need to specify the folders that our executable depends on. So we will click on this Add Folder button. We will navigate to our distribution directory, and we will load all our assets folder by folder. Unfortunately, there's no faster way of doing this. Now, in this pop-up screen, please make sure to select yes, because we want to include the assets within the directories and not just the directories themselves. Okay, so yes, for sure. And we will do the same for the rest of our asset folders. Perfect, and we can double check that all our assets were included if we see this asterisk at the very, very end of the paths. Beautiful, let's move on. Now, my rule of thumb with things I'm not familiar with is if I don't know what it is, I don't touch it. So we will uncheck this check mark because I have no idea what a .myp file is all about. If you do, please do as you wish. I'm just gonna skip it. Now, in addition, we would like to create a shortcut both in the start menu as well as on the desktop, just to make our app extra accessible. Now, if you have any license associated with your program, this is the perfect place to load it. It's actually the only place to load it. Now, in my case, I'm going to go for the MIT license, which I found on this open source initiative website. We will scroll down. We will copy this entire license text and we will paste it inside Sublime, which is the text editor I'm using for this tutorial. We will do this in a new file and we will change the year to 2023. Now, the copyright holder, I'm not sure if it's Python simplified or me, so I'll just type Maria Shah. And in my case, it's not that important because I allow anyone to copy, modify, merge, publish, distribute, sublicense, and even sell my program. So I have no restrictions whatsoever. But in your case, if you have any type of restrictions on your license, please do some proper research. This is a legal document and you don't want to mess it up. So let's quickly save it. We will call it license.txt and we will save it in the root directory of our project. We will then navigate back to Inno Setup. We will browse and we'll fetch this new license document and we will move on. Now here, we get to choose if we'd like to install our program for all Windows users or just for the current user. Now, in my case, I'm going to skip it because I really don't care. Now, in the next section, we select the language of our app. In my case, it's English. Now, in this menu, we specify settings associated with the setup file, which Inno Setup will generate for us. So first, we will select an output directory. In my case, I'll just go for the parent directory of our root, which is random recipe picker-main, but it doesn't really matter. You can do this for the desktop. Just make sure you remember where you saved it so you can fetch it later on. You will then specify the name, which in my case is random recipe picker in upper camel case, then underscore Windows, then underscore 1.5, which is the version, and then I guess setup, right? And if you need some inspiration, I highly recommend to check out your downloads folder, where you can probably find some recent setup files which you've downloaded regardless of this tutorial. And as you can see, there is really no one-size-fits-all convention. Steam doesn't even bother to specify the operating system or the version or anything else besides it's a Steam setup. So it's entirely up to you, okay? Now, we can also choose the icon for our setup file. And you can, of course, go for the exact same icon as your executable. In my case, I'll go for something a bit more traditional. I've prepared it in advance. There you go. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this icon. You can find it in a simple Google search. Okay, so I'm gonna go for this one. Now, in addition, we can even set a password for our setup file. Some sort of a product key, but You already know I'm not gonna do this, so let's just skip it. Now lastly, we will leave this hashtag define checkmark on, and now we can finish our wizard settings. Now this will convert everything we've done in the wizard into a compilable file, but we cannot compile it just yet. We will need to make a tiny adjustment to the asset directories. So we will select no, and we will scroll down all the way to the files section, and what we need to change here is the destination directory. So instead of searching for our logos inside the distribution folder, which is indicated by curly brackets app, we will search for them in the distribution folder /assets. Ha! And we will do the same for the rest of our directories. We will do this for the database, so curly brackets app /data, and we'll do this for the fonts, curly brackets app /fonts. Now, this is a very important step. If you don't do this, Inno Setup will place all your assets inside the exact same directory as your executable, and as a result, your program will fail. So if you have any subfolders inside your distribution directory, you have to manually specify them here. It's not going to happen automatically, folks, okay? So let's quickly save this file somewhere on our desktop, maybe, just in case, who knows? Let's call it just in case. I will delete it shortly. And let's go ahead and compile, either by pressing Ctrl F9 or just this lovely little button. And awesome, once we see this finished message, we will then navigate to the parent directory of our root, which is random recipe picker -main, and there you go. Here's our lovely setup file. Now we can of course test if this file works as expected in the current system. However, a better test is installing it in a completely different system just to make sure we didn't miss anything. So let me quickly jump on my Alienware and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's quickly double click our setup file, and wow! We are immediately presented with our license agreement. So let's quickly accept it. And let's see if everything worked. Let's click finish. Holy smokes, you guys! Here's our beautiful application. Good job. Now let's quickly check that it's fully operational. And yep, it works as expected. Now let's have a quick look inside the program files. So program files 86. And then random recipe picker. Beautiful! Everything is so organized. I think it looks so much better than just dumping all our files in the exact same directory as our executable. Good job! Now we know exactly how to turn our executable and assets into a single setup file. Amazing! And thank you so much for watching. If you found this tutorial helpful, please share it with the world. And don't forget to give it a huge thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos of this kind, you can always subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell. Now, if you have anything to say or any questions, please leave them in the comments below. You know I read your comments all the time, and I'll see you very soon in another awesome tutorial. In the meanwhile, bye-bye!